Today, we're going to talk about one of the most infamous deals in all of history, the Munich Agreement. It was this really high-stakes gamble to try and stop a world war from breaking out in Europe. But the big question is, did it actually buy peace, or did it just kick the can down the road? Let's get into it.
So I want you to imagine something. You're a leader in the 1930s. The absolute horror of World War I, which killed millions, is still a fresh, painful memory for everyone. Your number one job is to make sure that never, ever happens again. So this question right here, what would you risk to stop a war? That's exactly what was on their minds. Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1938, and all of Europe is just completely on edge. Germany's leader, Adolf Hitler, is making some really aggressive demands, and there's this feeling that another huge war is right around the corner. And the flashpoint for all this tension? A place called the Sudetenland. So what exactly was the Sudetenland? Well, it was this really important border region in the country of Czechoslovakia. And it was home to about 3 million people who actually spoke German and considered themselves ethnically German. Hitler used this as his main excuse, saying he just wanted to protect these people by making the region part of Germany. But this area was so much more than just a piece of land. For Czechoslovakia, losing the Sudetenland would be a complete disaster. I mean, it's where they had built their main line of defense, a massive system of modern forts. It was also home to key factories and natural resources. If they lost it, the whole country would be left wide open and totally defenseless. So, faced with Hitler's threats, Britain and other European powers had to come up with a plan. And the strategy they landed on would become one of the most controversial policies of the 20th century. It was called appeasement. You'll hear this word appeasement a lot when you study this period, and all it really means is giving an aggressive leader some of what they want in the hope that it'll satisfy them and, prevent a much bigger fight. The logic was, okay, let's just give Hitler this one thing, and then maybe he'll calm down and be a reasonable partner. And the man driving this whole policy was the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain. He was feeling intense pressure from the public back home, who were absolutely terrified of another war. Chamberlain genuinely believed he could reason with Hitler, so he flew to Germany not once, not twice, but 3 times to negotiate face-to-face. And this leads us to one of the most famous, or maybe infamous, quotes of all time. When Chamberlain got back to Britain after signing the deal, he actually waved this signed paper in the air and told the cheering crowds that he had brought back peace for our time. And for a brief moment, it really felt like the world had dodged a bullet. So, let's look at how this deal was actually made. The leaders of 4 countries, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany, all met in the German city of Munich to decide what to do. But if you look closely at those flags, you'll notice someone very important is missing. And this is the part of the story that is just stunning. The leaders of Czechoslovakia, the country whose land was literally being given away, were not even allowed into the negotiating room. Can you believe that? They were forced to just sit in a hotel nearby and wait for these other leaders to decide the fate of their nation. Let's quickly break down what the deal actually said. Germany got pretty much everything it asked for. Complete control over the Sudetenland, with troops moving in almost immediately. Czechoslovakia had to pull its army out and leave all those expensive modern forts behind for the Germans to just take over. And what did Hitler give in return? A promise. He signed a piece of paper saying this was his last territorial demand in Europe. Now, you might be asking, wait, where was France in all this? Well, France actually had a treaty with Czechoslovakia, promising to defend it. But the French government was also terrified of war and felt its own military wasn't ready. So, with Britain pushing so hard for a deal, France went along with it and abandoned its ally. The sense of relief across Europe was huge, but it didn't last long. Not at all. In fact, the peace that Chamberlain thought he had secured was about to completely fall apart. This timeline really shows you just how quickly everything went wrong. The deal is signed on September 30th, German troops move in the very next day. And then, less than 6 months later, on March 15th, 1939, German soldiers march right into the rest of Czechoslovakia and take over the whole country. The promise was broken, the deal was worthless. And here you can see the promise versus the reality, side by side. Hitler's solemn pledge that the Sudetenland was his last territorial claim was a flat-out lie. By invading the rest of Czechoslovakia, a country full of non-German Slavic people, he proved his ambitions were much, much bigger.
For the world, this was a wake-up call. The policy of appeasement had failed.
But not everyone was fooled by the agreement in the first place. A British politician named Winston Churchill, who was a huge critic of Chamberlain, stood up and gave this fiery speech. He basically told them, "You were offered a choice between war and shame. You chose shame, and you will still get war, only it'll be on much worse terms for us." And of course, he was right.
The failure at Munich wasn't just a political disaster at the time. It became this powerful, lasting lesson in history and politics that people still talk about and argue over to this day.
So why are we still talking about this one event from 1938? Well, because the word Munich has become a kind of code word for the dangers of appeasement. It's a historical warning that giving in to dictators doesn't always work, that a deal means nothing if one side is lying, and that abandoning smaller nations can have catastrophic results for everyone.
And all of this leaves us with a really tough question. We know that compromise and talking things out are super important to avoid wars, but the story of Munich forces us to think, where is the line? At what point does a reasonable compromise become a dangerous concession that just encourages an aggressor to demand even more? It's something leaders are still grappling with today.